Yep. Good afternoon, everybody. This meeting will be chaired by me, don't have the aesthetic attributes of the normal chair, but you'll just have to live with it. So I'll start with a karakia. I just remind everybody to put their phones on silent mode. Karakia, whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia makina kina ki utu, kia mataratara ki tai, e hiake ana te ata kuro, he tio, he huka, he hau, tihe Mayoral. Recording statement. The public section of this Mayoral forum has been recorded but not live streamed. The recording will be made available on the Bay of Plenty Regional Council's website following the meeting. Apologies. I have apologies been received from Mayor Tapsell for late arrival and via Zoom. Mayor Tapsell's online. There you are, Mayor Tapsell. Good afternoon.
Also failing chair as well.
Oh, yeah, cool. Mayoral, Andrew Moraes, he's arrived. And via Zoom, Julia Gardine, Fiona McTavish, and Miriam Terrace. Are there any further apologies? If not, can I have a move and a seconder, please? Mayor Mahe and seconded by Mayor Moore. All those in favour? Against? Late items. Are there any items to be added to the agenda? No, we can move on. Public excluded minutes would be transferred into the open section, but if there are no observations to be made, there we'll take both the public minutes and the public excluded minutes all together. Does anybody have any observations or corrections for the public excluded section? No? Well, can I have a move and a second to take those two sets of minutes together, please? Mover Mayor Denia, seconder Mayor Moore. All those in favour? All those against? The ayes have it. Thank you. We now move to the presentation section. There are quite a few presentations this afternoon, 4 to be exact, and a verbal update on local water done well. The first presentation is from the Vice-Chancellor, Professor Neil Quigley, and Pro-Vice-Chancellor, Professor Joseph Lane from Waikato University. And it touches on a subject that, bit of a pet subject of mine, the health crisis that we're experiencing. I think it's widely acknowledged that we are in a health crisis. It's got many facets. The crisis didn't happen from one day to the next. It's been decades in the making, and I guess it's not going to be fixed from one day to the next either. Modern health systems require human capital, and that's what universities are about. They require health infrastructure, consumables, and also a research base. It is said that in New Zealand we are short of 1,700 doctors, about 5,000 nurses, and a whole bunch of other specialists. Graduates from Otago and Auckland, some about 500 to 600. In my day when I went through university, it was free. This country invested in human capital. Today, universities are run more like businesses, and a doctor that has to invest, I don't know, I guess the speakers will tell us about it, somewhere between, I'm guessing, $100,000 and $150,000 to get trained, will want to recoup the investment themselves, and so some of them fly the coop. But I will hand it over to the two gentlemen, if they are present. Thank you, professors. It's all yours.
Thank you. We appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this afternoon. Tēnā koutou e tēnei ahi, tēnei te mihi ki a koutou katoa. We're going to speak about what has been called in the public domain the Waikato Medical School, but actually will be called the New Zealand Graduate School of Medicine when it comes to fruition. And the reason for that is that it will be graduate entry only, and also it will have coverage across a large part of the country. Originally, when we started working on the idea 80 years ago now, we were thinking of a much more localised regional model, but particularly with the support of Dr. Shane Retty, we expanded the vision of what we were doing, and he supported the idea that it should be more national in scope. So, Victor, you have alluded to some of the workforce issues, so people are aware of this. We're graduating about 60% of the doctors that the country needs. We have a massive shortage of doctors in the country at the moment. What that means is that we're reliant on international medical graduates to fill the workforce gaps that we have. The strategy of importing doctors from overseas has been going on for a long time. The pandemic, of course, exposed the problem with that the borders were closed. It wasn't possible to get people to come.
Would you like to take questions on the fly or at the end?
On the fly as people have them, yes.
Okay.
And so we're also now at the point where many of the countries from which we imported doctors in the past have their own shortage, and it's very difficult to get doctors, except from developing countries where they're graduating doctors and they find it attractive to move to New Zealand. The problem with that, of course, is those developing countries need their own doctors and they've paid to train them. So us taking them is not necessarily the ideal strategy. What we observed when we looked at what's happening around the world in medical education is that there's this incredible innovation and dynamism occurred in Australian medical education in the past 25 years. And New Zealand really has ignored that. So in Australia, in the past 25 years, they've established multiple new medical degree programs, the majority of them 4-year graduate entry programs, as opposed to the 5-year undergraduate programs we have here. And also, unlike New Zealand, in Australia, there are universities cooperating so that there are multi-institution pathways into medical degrees. Give you a quick example, there's a rural program in Shepparton, which is run by the University of Melbourne Medical School, but La Trobe University has half the places in that program in Shepparton because La Trobe University doesn't have a medical school. And around Australia, you see other evidence of that sort of cooperation. University of Newcastle, a long-established medical school, works with Armidale, New England, because they wouldn't be able to sustain a medical school given the scale of that university. So we have a lot to learn from the Australian experience. So New Zealand has at the moment just 2 medical schools, as you're aware. They are undergraduate entry programs, which means 5 years of study in medicine after, as a minimum, 1 year of health sciences. But at the moment, around 30% of the students that Auckland and Otago take into medicine have already completed a degree. So for those students, it's an 8-year program that they're completing, and the cost of that obviously is substantial. It's also important in New Zealand, Otago and Auckland only allow entry from the first year based on their own course grades. So it's not possible to take health science papers anywhere else in the country and still be able to get into the 5-year program after the first year of health sciences at any other university. So in Australia, as I said, 23 medical schools from 26 university pathways. And at the moment, there are something like 350 New Zealanders studying medicine in Australia. One of the reasons for that is that it's materially less expensive to study medicine in Australia than in New Zealand. The tuition fees for students in Australia are 25% less than in New Zealand at the moment. Of course, New Zealanders qualify for domestic student places in Australia, so they face only the domestic student fees. If a student, sorry.
What is a typical tuition fee?
So the tuition fees at the moment at Auckland and Otago are around $18,000 a year. And in Australia, the government has capped the tuition fees for medicine at 13,200 a year. So even allowing for the exchange rate, there's still a significant difference in cost. Add to that the fact that if you're a graduate, you can study only for 4 years rather than 5. So, yes. Mate.
I had a question around what a graduate is. Is it like specifically a graduate of health science, or is it, could it be a commerce degree? Or
in Australia, it can be any degree. So, okay, so even it varies from university to university. I think the University of Melbourne is more restrictive around science background. The University of Sydney says that they'll accept a student from any degree background, doesn't have to be in science or health science.
No, that's really helpful. And then secondly, just on that, is this, you've done some research and this would be a very popular way of doing medicine, is it?
It is. It's the most popular way in Australia now. And what it does, if you have a graduate entry program, is it neutralizes for some of the impact of people going to school in different locations, and some of them science being not as well taught as others, or the other academic subjects not being so well taught. It also allows students to mature academically at different times, so that not everything rests on the first year health sciences grades, and those in turn being really significantly affected by the grades that students got in year 13 at school. So with a graduate entry program, it's less the case that you needed to go to Auckland Grammar or St Cuthbert's to be able to get the grades that you need to get into medicine from first year. So as I was saying, the advantage with a 4-year program, if you're a graduate, is that you only need to pay 4-year fees. When you add that to the lower tuition cost in Australia, it means that for a graduate, it would be 40% less expensive in tuition fees to study medicine in Australia than to study it here. So no wonder there's 350 New Zealanders studying medicine there. The problem with that is the way medicine works and the pathways into postgraduate training and then into employment. Those New Zealanders don't come back to New Zealand in general once they get onto the pathway of studying postgraduate training and then work in Australia. So what our proposed graduate entry medical school aims to address is keeping those students who are interested in studying medicine through a graduate entry pathway in New Zealand, giving them more options, and in particular an option to take a program that is only 4 years rather than the existing 5. So on the structure of the program that we've proposed, if I could pass over to my colleague Jo Lane, who's our Pro-Vice Chancellor for the Division of Health, and in addition to starting our nursing, our pharmacy and midwifery programs over the past few years. He's the one who's been doing much of the detailed work with the Ministry of Health on our proposal for a medical school. Joe, thank you.
Sure thing. Good afternoon, welcome. So in terms of the program, what we're looking to do is adopt and adapt a very common model in Australia that we know delivers different workforce outcomes. So whilst, yes, we have a significant shortage of doctors in New Zealand and we're simply not training enough doctors, we're also not really training the doctors that we need. What I mean by that is that our biggest shortages are in primary care and are in regional and rural New Zealand. As a consequence, our dependence on international medical graduates is much more substantially felt in our regional communities than it is in our main urban centres. So once you get outside of Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch and Dunedin, where the vast majority of medical education is taking place, outside of those regions, more than half of our doctors are coming from an overseas trained pathway. So this is to try to specifically address the shortages that we've got. Now, we've worked with a number of different Australian partner universities to develop the program and have aligned ourselves with the University of Wollongong curriculum. This is a 4-year graduate entry program that is delivering the best workforce outcome needs that align with our needs here in New Zealand. That is the highest proportion of graduates who will ultimately choose to work in primary care. The highest proportion of graduates will ultimately choose to work in regional and rural communities. So this is a very well-established, well-proven model, and we have been working through a process of adapting that to the New Zealand context to ensure that we are able to deliver a much higher proportion of graduates going into primary care and working in regional and rural New Zealand.
Just to be clear, to produce a finished product, a general practitioner and a specialist, I'm using numbers between 10 and 12 years. What sort of numbers would be correct?
Yes, no. So you're correct. So there are 3 stages effectively to becoming a fully trained doctor. There is completing a primary medical program, which is what medical schools are responsible for. So the 5-year program that Auckland and Otago are running and the 4-year program that we're proposing is what's known as the primary medical program. After that point, students will then move through to their junior doctor years. So this is when they're typically working in our large urban hospitals, so-called PGY1, PGY2 years. After completing those 2 years, you then have general vocational registration, and then you can choose a particular specialty. So it's at that point you would start the what's known as the GPEP program to train to become a GP. That would be 3 years of further study. Or you would then be trying to embark on one of the other, say, surgical specialties or one of the other procedural specialties.
And typical out-of-pocket costs for the student, for the whole, to do the whole lot? The
student's only paying fees for the medical school itself. So the first 4 years in terms of what we're proposing. Yeah. After that point, you are now employed by Health New Zealand.
Oh, okay.
Or out in the private workforce.
Okay.
Joe, sorry. There's just one addition to that, which is that some preliminary conversations have started about the potential for us to be able to shorten the period of training for people to become fully qualified general practitioners if they have been through a primary medical program such as ours, which is very much more focused on general practice and general medicine than the existing programs. So we're hoping we might find a way to shorten up some of the route to full qualification, as well as shortening up the degree route as well.
So one of the biggest challenges with establishing a medical school is actually getting your student selection policies right. There are a very large number of people that would like to become a doctor, and there is a very large number of people who are capable of becoming a doctor in terms of their academic ability. At the moment, though, there is a very strong reliance on academic grades to decide who makes it into medicine and who doesn't make it into medicine. So to give you a rough indication, at Otago or Auckland, if you're going through that first year health science program, you'll start with a couple of thousand students and they're duking it out for about 200 places. They will need an average grade of about 96% across 7 disparate subjects. 95% might get you waitlisted, might. There's very little academic evidence to say that somebody that can get 96% grades is going to be a better doctor than somebody who can get 95% grades. And when we look at some of the priority schemes that sit in New Zealand, students are enrolled in those programs with marks down as low as 65%. They then start those programs and successfully complete those programs. They go out in workforce and they make great doctors. So you can see there's a very wide mark difference in terms of how students are being admitted into the program. Now, we're proposing to do things quite differently, and again, looking at what is working really successfully in the Australian context and what you see working well in the UK, Canada, and US context. So you set a threshold entry in terms of academic ability. We absolutely need doctors, students coming into a program who are going to successfully complete the program. No point bringing people in who are going to fail it. And so a student coming with any bachelor's background, typically with a B grade average, then moves forward into this first stage of the process. We're then checking it against a second assessment, which is known as GAMSAT. So that's a standardized aptitude test, which assesses a student's ability to reason in physical sciences, biological sciences, social sciences, and written communication. We know with those two pieces of information together, we can make a good assessment about whether a student is capable academically to become a doctor. And then we can move all of those students into the second phase of the process, which is to consider how well that individual is aligned with workforce needs. So what demonstrated evidence have they got? Community involvement, what part of the country do they come from? What prior experience have they got with health? Because there are very good international evidence predictors that those individuals will choose to go on to a career in primary care or to go on and work in regional or rural communities. So that creates a ranked list of applicants, and then you will do interviews for 3 times the number of places available. So we're proposing a program that would start with 120 students as its intake number, so there'd be 360 interviews. Of those interviews, we then score them, add them to those priority ranking factors, and that ultimately gives us our offer of place. As I said, that's a very different process, but it is a process that we know delivers very good workforce outcomes in the Australian context. There we go. In terms of the program structure, so the program is as a 4-year program. Year 1 will be based at the Hamilton campus for the University of Waikato. This is where it is an intensive sort of study of the biomedical sciences and social determinants of health. So what are the sort of biophysical factors that drive health? What are the different social determinants and access to healthcare, that sort of thing. The program will be taught through what's known as a digital first pedagogy. So this is using the latest developments in terms of digital anatomy tables and virtual reality to learn around the human body and how it works. Again, this is picking up on what's happening with the latest and newest medical schools that are being established internationally. And there's a significant component of what we describe as multidisciplinary clinical simulation. So that is simulated hospital experiences or primary care experiences with actors and with other students in other health disciplines. And as Neil alluded to before, we have a very successful nursing, midwifery, and pharmacy programs. And so we see those 3 programs working closely with our doctors. We know the future of healthcare involves multidisciplinary care teams, and if we want and expect our clinicians to work together out in workforce, then we really need to make sure that they're able to train and educate together when they're at the university. That then moves out. Years 2, 3, and 4 take place in regional and rural communities across New Zealand. So this is the clinical placement component of the program. This is where we also have a significant difference compared to the existing programs delivered by Auckland and Otago. So there is a much higher focus on primary care exposure, much higher focus on community health exposure, and a much higher focus on generalism rather than the subspecialties. So in year 2, principally based at our regional and rural hospitals, doing rotations through a series of different aspects of medicine, the different medical specialties. This is all designed to prepare the students for year 3, which is the sort of crown and the jewel in the crown rather of the program. So in year 3, students are based in smaller rural communities, and it's what's known as a longitudinal primary care placement. So students will be based for 40 weeks continuously at the same GP practice, approximately 3 days per week, and then doing 1 day per week in acute care. So either at the rural hospital or at the local accident and emergency centre. Now, this is a very different way of training compared to what happens at the moment, and it allows students to get significant exposure and experience with primary care physicians. One of the key things about what's fantastic about becoming a primary care physician, becoming a general practitioner, is building relationships with patients and being able to journey with them in terms of their health experiences. Now, with current practice at Auckland and Otago, students will typically do a 2 to 6 week rotation in primary care, and that's the sum total of their experience. Now, I don't know what your access to primary care is like, but I've got to be both very sick and very lucky to try to get 2 appointments with my GP in the space of a month. So the ability to build relationship with patients and to see some of the benefits of working in general practice are really very hamstrung by the current training model. In contrast, spending 40 weeks living in closely with the community, building relationships with people over time is a fantastic way to show the benefits of why someone might want to ultimately choose to become a general practitioner. The final year of the program is aligned with what's known as a trainee intern model here in New Zealand. This is as part of our discussions with the Medical Council of New Zealand and adapting an Australian curriculum to work in the New Zealand context. Students do rotations, different placements in a range of different health settings, including regional and rural hospitals, more in primary and community care. There's also the opportunity for students to do what are known as electives and selectives, and this is their ability to choose some additional experiences which might be in very remote communities, could be based in some of the Pacific Islands, could be involved in research activities as well.
So the opportunity that we have is to create a different model of medical education, but also to work with communities to achieve that, bringing obviously funding from central government to work with local and regional governments, and also with communities, and to identify particular community medical locations in which people want to work with us. So what's really important is that we won't be replicating the Auckland and Otago model. We won't be attempting to replicate the workforce outcomes that they get. What we'll be attempting to do is to do something different in terms of location and training, something very different in terms of workforce outcomes. And where the model that we're proposing has been used in Australia and in Canada and in the UK, what has been found is that the doctors that are produced do form a very strong association with general practice and primary care. But more particularly, with our model, it'll be possible to match people with the particular locations from which they came. So whereas at the moment, if you want to train as a doctor and you're from Tauranga or from somewhere else in the Bay of Plenty, you've got to move to Auckland effectively or move to Dunedin. And for the most part, those students will live in Auckland or Dunedin and Christchurch for a number of years before they have options to do anything different. Our model suggests quite a different approach. A first year in Hamilton, but then after that, the ability to match students with training facilities in the area from which they actually came and which they have family connections. And so they don't sever the link with their community, with their family, with their thinking locally by having to train as a doctor. And that's likely to produce doctors who are much more attached to the idea of practicing in rural and provincial areas than those that have spent the last 8 years living in Auckland or in Dunedin and Christchurch. Thank you. Welcome any other questions that you might have.
It's going to take 10 or 12 years before you start producing people. How of the 500 or 600 graduates that are trained in New Zealand at the moment, what proportion would remain here, say within 5 years of graduating? Do half of them fly the coop, or?
No, we actually don't lose a huge number overseas. The proportion has stayed fairly consistent for quite some time. The problem is just our absolute shortages have got bigger and bigger because for decades we've not been training the numbers that we need. So you're correct that the proportion has been increasing slightly. It then got reset with the pandemic because of course nobody could leave, and then it's back up again. But I would say it's less than 20% you're losing at that point.
In the range of 10 to 20%, yes.
That's less than I thought.
Yeah.
A bigger problem just around retention, to talk about our international medical graduates that come into New Zealand, is that we do know that 80% of those will leave within 2 years. So most of the international medical graduates that are coming to New Zealand and are serving in our rural and regional communities and serving in primary care are really here for a working holiday. And we do thank them for their service as they're here as a working holiday. But by the time they've sort of got up to speed with, Kiwi traditions and ways of doing things, they've moved off to another location, and then the merry-go-round goes round again.
Chairman Leader, Mayor Tunui, and then Mayor Drysdale.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Neil and Joe. Very interesting. Tends to make a lot of common sense. But a couple of questions is, having a whānau member at Otago at the moment, the comment was that they really appreciated going to a high school that did the 3 science disciplines, because it gave them a real leg up in terms of that first year. And the attrition rate from those who didn't do the 3 sciences at school was pretty high, because, they don't concentrate on physics and chemistry. So, I mean, that was interesting. The couple of questions is, offshore doctors, when they come here, they've got to pass a threshold test, don't they, before they can practice? The other one is the new model developing in terms of primary health care or intervention is nurse practitioners, which I understand have got about a 10-year training period. Is that a tertiary component, or is it just all in-house training through the Ministry of Health? And do they, they do a lot of intervention at primary health level, don't they?
Yep, sure. I'll just start with the first one. So you're quite right. With the way we're currently taking students into medicine, your performance in physics at high school is your strongest predictor as to whether you'll make it into the second year of the medical program. That's a function of the way that program is being designed and operated. It does not mean that your ability to do physics makes you a better doctor than somebody's ability who's not quite as good at physics. So you're not wrong, but it is the point that some students around the country do not have access to study physics at high school. General science might be taught to year 11, but if you were unfortunate enough that you were living in a smaller community where you could not find a physics teacher, then your ability to try to get into medicine is significantly impacted. And this is part of the value proposition of having a graduate entry program where a student can come to university, they can round out their academic abilities, demonstrate that they've got the necessary academic performance, and then move into a program. So that was question 1. Question 2 was qualification. So New Zealand has, well, the Medical Council in New Zealand has relationships with other medical councils around the world. And so some countries, there's a straight mapping, and that if you're trained in one jurisdiction, you'll be able to work and practice in New Zealand. Others don't fit into that situation, and students then come and do a competency assessment and then move into a different process. So there are different ways of mapping, and so different countries have different pathways to get in here and to work in New Zealand. To pick up on the third comment about nurse practitioners, so we've got a very successful nurse practitioner program at the University of Waikato. To become a nurse practitioner, you need to be a nurse to start with, registered nurse. So that's typically a 3-year training process. Then at the moment, you need a minimum of 5 years experience as a nurse, and then you work your way through a master's program part-time to ultimately get through to the nurse practitioner training. And that's where collectively it adds up to 10 years. What I can tell you is that we're exploring at the moment the option of a so-called direct entry nurse practitioner program, which would be a much faster pathway and would see our nurse practitioners out in workforce at a younger age, allowing them to contribute to that workforce for a much longer period of time. I think the average age in terms of becoming a nurse practitioner is early 40s, and it's entirely possible that, you know, with a less haphazard pathway through your training and your work experiences, you could get there in your late 20s, and that would give you obviously a longer period of time to work top of scope and to contribute to the health system.
Just to reassure you on open entry from non-science subjects, there's quite a big international literature now comparing the performance in medicine degrees of students who came from a social science or arts background and students who came from a science background. So Mount Sinai, which is one of the great medical schools in New York, for years, 20 years, has taken 30% of their intake from students who did undergraduate social science programs. And their data shows that those students perform just as well by the end of the medical training as the students who came through a science program.
Thank you. Mia Tunui.
Kia ora. Actually, it was me. But thank you very much, and apologies, we're joining by Zoom, but I am a proud graduate of the management school in Waikato and do want to acknowledge the growing presence of the University of Waikato in the Bay of Plenty region. The question I have, because many of our new citizens and residents, we often have very qualified international migrants coming into our region, but obviously because their qualification is different to the New Zealand standards, the feedback that I get is they have to start all the way from the start of a medical degree, or sorry, whatever you call it. And so I just wanted to check if in the consideration of improving or enhancing the educational experience, has there also been consideration of that? Because if I was quite shocked at the number. We have 1,700 doctors less than we need. But I am aware that we also do have qualified doctors with international qualifications who just simply haven't started again, although they love medicine, they love primary care, they just haven't started again because of the length of time that it takes compared to them being able to earn in another industry straight away.
Yeah, so on that, it's an issue principally for the Medical Council of New Zealand as to which other countries they consider delivering comparable programs of training that we map against New Zealand. And I think just part of the concern that those doctors that might arrive here are unable to practice, so they can do what's known as NZ-REX, which is a competency assessment, which would then allow them to start at the PGY1, PGY2, so they start again as junior doctors. So that pathway is there and it's being expanded at the moment. So there's been some announcements in that space. A very successful trial in the Waikato region by Waikato Hospital, not actually in any way affiliated with the university, but that's been a very successful pathway, and they are looking to expand that, particularly where those people going through the NZ-REX pathway are able to do so if they will choose to go into primary care, which is where our biggest workforce shortages sit. So it's at this stage, it's not something we're able to directly influence. It sits with the Medical Council. But as Neil did allude to earlier, in terms of trying to shorten that overall pathway of going through a medical program where a student's got a large exposure and experience to primary care practice, then going into your junior doctor years again with additional community-based attachments, primary care exposure, then means that potentially the 3-year GPEP program might be compressed. And there's active conversations in that space about looking at the total pathway and from start to finish, how can we look to graduate doctors in a more expedient manner.
Unlike the Otago and Auckland program, with graduate entry only, we would be open to students who had a degree from anywhere in the world that was equivalent to the degrees in New Zealand. So there's no requirement for a degree from a New Zealand university in what we've said.
Ed Drysdale.
Yeah, so obviously we've seen the need. I'm a couple of questions. One, how many graduates are Auckland and Otago producing at the moment? And then secondly, where are you at in this process and when potentially you're going to be up and running?
Sure thing. So on the first question, so the intakes at Otago and Auckland are just over 300 students each. Now, What's quite significant and important for people to realise is those are enormous intake numbers. So the average size of a medical school, both internationally and Australia, is an intake of about 150 to 160 students. So with their current size and scale, they are sort of twice the average size. If we look across the OECD, New Zealand is completely dead last in terms of our ratio of medical schools to population. So we are in a highly unusual situation, only having 2 medical schools for the size of the country. Where we are in the process, so we have completed our contributions to a detailed business case, which is sitting with the government at the moment, and we wait for a decision from them.
Kia ora, Stace Law, Chief Executive of Poutiki District Council. Firstly, thank you for the presentation, really interesting, and congratulations on the work that you're doing in this space. Really encouraging to see. Just a question around rural and remote communities and the need. There's a clear need for these types of skills and specialists in those areas of Aotearoa, and I like the process and the thinking. Just a query around, people will go to these places after spending time at a hub, whether it's in Tauranga, Auckland, Otago, and it can be quite a change, from that social interaction and those things that are outside of just the academic world. Have you thought about, partnering with iwi councils and the like to try and wrap around, doctors that come to these remote places, and it can be quite a change in lifestyle. It's could be quite an isolated scenario. So yeah, just hearing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we can see when we look into Australian and Canadian experiences in particular, is that the success of a student being based in an area is not just about the placement. It's not just about the clinical exposure that they get. It's about, if they've got a partner, did their partner manage to find a job? If they've got kids, did the kids able to find a good school to be at? Were they able to find accommodation? So when we talk about the different regional and rural communities where students would be based, ideally they're there for all 3 years of the clinical placement program. And we've been in ongoing conversations with Health New Zealand about how do we ensure that there's appropriate PGY 1 and 2 spots available in similar locations as well. On the back of the original announcement from February 2023, we had another district council that's not represented sitting around this table get in touch with us, and we've had some really very productive conversations with them about what would it look like for students to be based in their region. And it has been that full wraparound conversation with iwi, accommodation, other tertiary education providers that are in that space, and pathways, and that's exactly the model that we are looking to try to operate and run with. So it's a very distributed model that's intended to be very closely engaged with the community.
Our ideal, in a way, would be each year to find a student who'd grown up in a Poutiki, who could train in medicine and then go back there for the final 3 years of the medicine degree based in the community medical centre and do their training there. So that they never really lost the connection with the community, even though they had to go away for a couple of years to do some of the training in Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you. Excellent. And very open to talking more about this if there's an opportunity to help in that space. Thank you.
Andrew?
Thank you. You have made a really good point that we're unusual in the OECD. The situation's existed for a long time, and typically when problems exist for a long time, it's because there's a persistent barrier to solving the problem as well. Have you perceived what those barriers are, and have you got a plan to overcome them? And some of them might be really structural. Like, do you have opposition from the medical council, for example, that actually likes to keep the number of doctors, the supply short, so they can have scarcity power and bargaining? So interested in those structural issues.
The colleges that control the number of people going through into different specialties in medicine may well be an issue, but that's sort of a long way out of our wheelhouse. I think what we have discovered, though, is that in our tertiary system, universities are paid per student per year of enrolment. And what the fact that medicine is only taught at Auckland and Otago means is that every year thousands of young people from all over New Zealand enrol at Auckland and Otago. And so Auckland and Otago get the benefit of all of the funding that flows with those students. And of course, the ones who don't make the first year cut and stay and complete a degree and then apply after that, all of that is funded by the government and the students themselves through tuition fees. The system, unfortunately, provides an incentive for Auckland and Otago to force all these students to go to them and not anywhere else. Some of us of my age remember the time in New Zealand when medical intermediate was offered at a number of different universities, and you could stay at home, stay at the local university and still have a chance of getting into medicine. But that was all curtailed in the end of the 1980s. And the advantage that it provides to Auckland and Otago gives them extraordinarily strong incentives to invest in protecting the privileged position that they have. And if there's anything that we've found about our experience of the past, quite a few years for me, and Joe's been on the journey for more recently, it is the phenomenal political power and support in central Auckland and in Dunedin that they managed to raise to protect their existing position.
Interesting. I've got a question. In August, I've got half an hour in front of the minister to plead the case for health equity, which hasn't really been spoken about, and the case for halting privatisation of health, which I perceive is well on the track towards an American-style system if we don't do anything. What do you think I could say to the minister that might help change his mind?
In August, I'd like you to be able to say thank you, Simeon, for getting this across the line. But
I'll do that.
And the second thing is that the thank you will come with a medium-term plan to make it easier for people to get access to primary care. Of course, all the evidence says that if people can get effective access to primary care, they're less likely to end up in the hospital system for acute care. So the challenge we have at the moment is we're not serving our population in New Zealand well because we have too many people getting much sicker than they need to be because they can't get access to primary care.
On the equity issue?
Well, it depends which equity issue that you're talking about, whether it's geographical or social.
I believe it's class-based because it depends on income.
We think our model helps address that because we will be consciously looking for bright students who didn't have to go to a Decile 10 school in central Auckland to be able to get into medicine. That's not our target market. Our target market, as I said, is the student who is an outstanding performer at the high school in Opotiki and identified themselves in that way and has done an undergraduate degree in something or other and decided they want to be a doctor and they have a passion for that.
Thank you. Well, one last question, because I'd like to keep you here all day because I've got a long list of questions, but we can't do that. So, Mahi?
We have a great campus here and possibility to do more. Are you set on Hamilton?
Well, we're set on Hamilton for a start in the sense that, we've negotiated with the government through the process that we've been in so far for 120 places. If once we've got that up and running, they said to us, you can have another 60 places, then actually we could do something here at the campus. We'll certainly be doing things here at our campus in Tauranga that will help students with the undergraduate degree pathway into medicine. And we'll be looking to work with communities here for all of these training opportunities in years 2, 3, and 4. So we'll build definitely, but it really will be dependent on the government giving us enough places to make it viable to have a separate medical degree process here.
And I would just add on to that, if a student was to do their bachelor's degree here at the University of Waikato at the Tauranga campus, then do 1 year at the Hamilton campus and then 3 years back on placement, that would be 6 of their 7 years of study to become a doctor happening here in the Bay.
Thank you, Professors Quigley and Lane. I'm sure if there are any further questions that you'd answer them by email or something. Yep. Thank you very much and thanks for coming. So the next presentation is by sea cleaners, and we've had them here before, so I guess we're getting an update. Captain Hayden Smith and Trustee Jamie Reid. You gentlemen.
Thank you for the opportunity to come to see you again, and with tongue in cheek also, thank you for scheduling us directly behind the university professors as well. So, my name is Hayden Smith, founding trustee of the Sea Cleaners Trust, and yes, I have presented to you before. It was actually about a year ago. We had the privilege of sharing our story and our vision of what we were trying to achieve at the time. Jamie Reid, also fellow trustee of the Sea Cleaners Trust and Bay of Plenty ratepayer living here and helping us do what we do down here now as well. To give you a sense of, I know we have got the quarterly report on your desk there with what we have, I guess, been able to achieve since our last conversation. That was, we were able to get started. We were able to bring together funding to support what we're doing, not in its entirety to keep us going. We're always chasing our tail to the point where there's probably 2 or 3 months of funding in front of us before we get the next batch there. However, at the same time, what it has enabled us to do is to be able to bring a sense of reality to show what we are dealing with across the entire region, and that the consistency of wherever there is a population centre, there is a marine litter issue that we're dealing with. And with the vessel and the crew starting back in at the start of December, end of November, to the fact that they've already collected over 130,000 litres of rubbish from the Bay of Plenty region, it speaks volumes to what we're seeing around the rest of the country in terms of that waste is consistent with coming down through the stormwater systems and out through the local rivers, streams and estuaries out into our harbours and into the open coastal areas. And unfortunately, nowhere is immune from the issue either. One of the things that we have, I guess, been able to identify going over the last year and subsequently what we've actually had from Auckland Council is the development and opportunity that has come about through the waste minimisation fund that the councils receive in terms of providing almost more of a sustainable funding model to support us, which doesn't rely on us speaking to 12 different entities to keep ourselves going month on month throughout the year. With that, before I share on how and what we have done with that waste minimisation space, one of our patrons, Mayor Wayne Brown, actually also has a short message that he would like to share with you via video as well, if we may, and let's let that take place first. Thank you.
We won't take this off your time.
Thank you.
Have hauled out over Kia ora, neighbouring mayors of the beautiful Bay of Plenty and Northland regions. I'm with you today in my capacity as the Mayor of Auckland, but also as one of the patrons of my favourite charitable trust, Sea Cleaners. Since 2002, Sea Cleaners have hauled out over 18.6 million litres of marine waste from the waters of New Zealand. We have coordinated 185,000 hours of volunteer work while delivering highly engaging educational programs in schools to raise awareness, shift mindsets and upskill local communities to lead their own initiatives. Local government authorities all over New Zealand have varying roles when it comes to managing the health of our waterways. Regardless of the difference in our size and reach, I know we all agree that this issue deserves real focus and support. We're all connected by water. It's a huge part of who we are as a nation. I hope you'll support Sea Cleaners today by agreeing to co-fund a coordinated region-wide marine waste initiative. We're doing something similar here in Auckland, and the benefits and outcomes have been significant. If we act now, we can preserve the future of our waterways together. He waka eka noa.
Before Hayden carries on, I just wanted to quickly acknowledge the support of the Regional Council, TCC and Western Bay of Plenty, who have helped us get the boat in the water here, along with a number of private funders as well across the bay and some of the big trusts.
So what we have, just as mentioned by Mayor Brown, and within the documentation that we have provided, now we're certainly not looking for an answer today, but one of the things we would like to be able to achieve, because we've got such a collective here, knowing that the Waste Minimisation Fund opportunity with that government fund that you are able to distribute can actually provide us with the opportunity to secure that funding. If there is one allocated person that can help us coordinate a region-wide approach to a proposal for that to happen, that would be the greatest guidance that we could receive. Because again, as a charitable trust with very limited resources, knowing what we are doing in the Bay of Plenty to keep our team running and the amount of funders that we're constantly approaching, we are doing the same in Northland and the same in Canterbury. And what we have learned in Auckland recently with this Waste Minimisation Fund is that is we're able to multiply that in its own right to help us find this sustainable funding pathway to help us solve this problem that is unfortunately out of sight and out of mind of everyone. The debris and the volumes of what we're collecting speak for themselves. Unfortunately, the dumpings that we're finding down in stream banks and in the estuaries continue to come. So we know that what we are doing is actually achieving the results, and it's the results that are able to be measured back for certainly to work with that Waste Minimisation Fund. So that is really our ask for today, but to also let you know that we are succeeding and have been able to get that boat launched and get the team out on the water 5 days a week doing what we do.
Thank you for that presentation. I recall the presentation a year ago where you sought funding. It took us a little while to get ourselves together, I guess. And so last week, just for the forums update, council agreed to fund $25,000 for the next year. It is at this point just for 1 year. So I think there's a bit of a wait and see how it goes aspect to it, and see if we can demonstrate that it makes a real difference, as your patron was explaining. But hopefully it does. And it's fully support what you do, but just that challenge to make it a long-term funding commitment rather than a 1 year one. And I think part of that is coming from our waste levy as well. So that may be a good way to do it. Thank you.
Just as the professors were saying that, prevention is better than cure. What can be done in the prevention space here? Because you're sort of
the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff is how we are perceived a lot of the time. However, we are building the fence at the top of the hill. Our education program, our skippers are out speaking at local schools to engage with the schools across the region and actually across the country. On top of that, we have a school kit that goes out to over 30,000 students a year across the country. And that is just an ongoing process too. Utilising the opportunity through, I guess, our supporters channels to be able to help educate the wider public about the issue as well, all plays into part of what that, I guess, the education role is needed, just through the clear messaging and support for what we're doing. And to maximise that, we've actually just formed a partnership with Dentsu, one of the world's largest PR firms, who is actually about to embark on a campaign for us to enable those messages to be told as far and wide as possible across the country.
Because I gather that most of this stuff that ends up in the ocean is actually deliberately put, I mean, it's...
Well, you've got cats and dogs ripping open rubbish bags, you've got birds pulling stuff out of overflowing bins, you've got cars driving down the state highways and loose debris coming out of the windows, debris flying off the back of trucks. But then you've got large storms like we've got starting to roll through at the moment, and you've got wind blowing over wheelie bins, and recycling efforts are going straight down stormwater outlets or drains with the corresponding rain and weather that comes with those storms. So it's a real mixed bag about where it's coming from. I think the education and the consumer changes actually come towards trying to encourage people to be more mindful with what they're purchasing in the first place. And along with that, the educational efforts that we have towards actually educating the producers of those products too, to change their packaging. And we've had some significant success in that space as well. To pick one of them out, Nestle being one of the world's largest companies, the fact that we've had all of their staff out across the country a number of times over the last few years, they've actually started changing their packaging to be more eco-friendly products based on what they have seen out with us. And that's just a New Zealand initiative. I know they've got targets internationally they need to reach, but it was certainly sparked and accelerated through their efforts of getting out and actually helping us clean up as well.
Further questions? Not. Thank you very much for what you do. Amazing work.
Could I just ask, would it be best just for us to communicate in the first instance to try and find that single, I guess, person to help us navigate that as an idea of how and who we do deal with? That would be getting a link or a connection to that would be great.
So Ruben
Thank
says
you.
through him.
Brilliant.
So we'll channel it through Ruben.
Wonderful. Appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. Cheers. The next presentation on resource management reform is Namuta Potasi, General Manager, Strategic and Science, and Adele Hadfield, Strategy and Planning Manager, BOPRC. So thank you, ladies.
Tēnā koutou mayors, chair and CEOs. We're here today to provide a high-level overview of resource management reform for you. So just a reminder, this government is particularly focused on enabling growth and development, supporting economic development and growth, looking for simplification of processes. So with that context in mind, they have embarked on a resource management reform work program. So in terms of what we're going to cover off today, we're going to cover off what's hot. There's quite a lot of moving pieces at the moment. So we're going to cover off the Resource Management Bill 2, National Direction and replacement of the RMA. And we're going to loop that out with a heads up on some of the conversations we've been having at a staff level. So in terms of the big picture, I find this diagram really useful. It has got a lot of information. If I can make it work. It has got a lot of information, but it's got a lot of information all on one page. So it highlights the 3 different phases of resource management reform. It has the timelines across the way as well. It includes key dates for local government in terms of your annual plan, local body elections and LTP timing. And so I'm just going to go through it really quickly. Resource Management Reform Phase 1, so that has been completed. That was the replacement or the removal of the former pieces of legislation to replace the Resource Management Act and the fast track consents. The bits that I really want to focus on today are the RM Bill 2, Resource Management Bill 2, the consenting one, national direction, and the changes to the RMA. So if we specifically look at RM Bill 2, just flicking back, just in terms of those timeframes, you will recall, for those of you who lodged a submission on RM Bill 2, so this is the consenting matters one, these are the direct changes to the Resource Management Act itself. That went through its process. It called for submissions in February. Some councils submitted on that. It's come back to select committee. They've made some changes. We expect it to be enacted quite soon in sort of July, August. Once it is enacted, we need to give effect to it. So key parts or key changes from the select committee that I thought I'd just highlight. Consent duration. So the consent duration for long life infrastructure and energy, renewable energy, remains at 35 years. There were lots of submissions in opposition to the requirement not to have hearings as part of that consent hearing component. And so what central government have done is they've removed those requirements not to have a hearing. A lot of the councils around this table will be really familiar with medium density residential standards and how there is no longer an option to opt out. Those councils that those standards relate to, they must deliver on those. Permitted discharges was an important one for regional councils, and this is one that we did push really hard for. Because case law came in, it meant we needed to interpret rules, provisions in a certain way. That would actually mean if they hadn't made this change, that we would be requiring farmers across the region to gain a consent to discharge water. That wouldn't be considered a permitted activity. So we'd be looking at additional 3,300 consents would be required. So it's really great to see that these changes are coming in. Freshwater plans, much more definition in relation to what dairy farming, what scale of dairy farms would require a freshwater farm plan. And of course, the natural hazards provisions provide more tools for natural hazards, emergency management. The key change with the select committee reporting back is that they have, actually, no, it's not a key change because they've retained it. They have, for those of you who process land use consents, everyone processes land use consents. Currently, under the current framework, you can refuse a land use consent on the basis of natural hazards. Under this direction, you wouldn't be able to do that for infrastructure or primary sector activities, primary production activities. That's a really high level overview of RM Bill 2, which we expect to be enacted quite quickly, whether that's July or August. I can continue on to national direction. So through the chair, are you happy for us to take questions as we go?
Was a question about the Tamatarawa single wastewater discharge standards. Is that part of the permitted discharge rules? Or how does that land with the Resource Management Act reform?
Separate. They are separate pieces of legislation. This is our sort of complex operating environment. The things that I'm touching on here really are resource management reform, but you can see they're still interrelated. So that's a separate piece of regulatory change. So if we turn now to national direction, and there's a whole heap going on in this space, and I'm going to hand over to Adele to take you through it at a high level.
So we're right in the thick of this now, of course. So packages 1 to 3 have been out for about a month, and many of you have probably had staff reports back in terms of the content of those and the issues that you may have in each of the districts and the cities. I'll go through a little bit more detail of that. And Going for Housing Growth came out at the beginning of this month. So the first 3 packages closed for submissions at the end of July, and Going for Housing Growth at the end of August. one of the things when we start to look at if we go to the next slide, look at this, there is a package in the package. So there's a lot of things going on at the same time, and a lot of that, there's a bit of repetition across each of the policy statements or the national environmental standards. One of the things we're trying to do is unpick the fact that that duplication is consistent at the very least, and then look inside the detail of the package pieces and make sure that there is nothing of any sort of high risk areas that are going to go through. One of the things that we know is that these are going to be implemented really quickly, and we're unlikely to have a second chance or a second go at responding to this. At a staff level, we've been working across the region to make sure that all the districts and cities have what we're saying, and the districts and the cities themselves are sharing submission points and beginning to understand the impact and have discussions at a staff level on that. Not to say that there's 100% agreement across that, but at least we understand where we sit across the region. As Namuda has already said in terms of the overall approach to reform, the national environmental standards and the national policy statements are all picking up on the principle of more enabling of development, more permitted activities, and reduced environmental protection. So one of the critical things we're going to need to do through things like the regional spatial planning processes is actually identify where those critical matters are that we need to either protect or mitigate as we go forward in that more enabling environment. So not sure I need to go through each and every one of these. Some of them I think just to highlight things like NES Papakainga and NES Granny Flats. Some of the district plans are already as enabling, if not more enabling, than what's in the National Environmental Standard. So that's work that's already been done over the last few years by the districts in the city to actually engage in that space and enable those things to occur. The MPS infrastructure, again, as Namuda said, it is very enabling in terms of infrastructure delivery and infrastructure operation. And we just need to make sure that that's been done in the right way, in the right place. One of the matters of interest that we have is that infrastructure at the moment excludes social infrastructure and flood management infrastructure. So in terms of being enabling, one of the questions we're asking is what should be included in that definition of infrastructure if we're going to still look at well-functioning urban and district environments. Another matter for this region is probably around the NPS highly productive land. So we've got about 10% or just over 10% of our land area is LUC 1, 2 or 3. When we remove LUC 3, that reduces to just under 5% of the land area. So it's quite a large contribution. And some of those land uses, LUC 3 and even traditionally LUC 4 to 6, have some of our most highly productive and highly economically valuable activities on them. So in general, at the moment, the sentiment of the districts and ourselves that we've been thinking about is that a blanket approach to that is probably not in all of our best interests potentially, but looking at where there is local variations, how do you allow for that in this enabling environment? That's probably all I'll touch on there in any detail. So the Going for Housing Growth Program, the Pillar 1 work has come out in advance, so that's the work that we're looking at now. There are two kind of fundamental questions at the beginning of the submission, the discussion document on the Going for Housing Growth Pillar 1, and those relate basically to what does good, how do we achieve good outcomes through the RM reform? And that is a very open question. And the feedback we've got from MFE about why that's an open question is because they're still trying to determine that themselves. So one of the things that we are working again across the region on is trying to not necessarily say, let's wait until you tell us, but we should be now taking this opportunity through this Pillar 1 discussion document feedback to inform MFE and other government departments and ministries what we think individually and collectively are actually some of the key fundamental principles that we need to consider when we're looking at creating good future urban form and good future community, good places for communities to live. So we haven't got pillar 2 and 3 at the moment, but one of the things when we're looking at pillar 1, some of the things that is talking about is, and this has been spoken on since the beginning of the RM reform, is the ability of spatial plans to assist with infrastructure delivery and the costs of delivering infrastructure. One of the things that talks about is the relationship then between infrastructure delivery and planning, our LTPs and our infrastructure strategies, which we rely on a fair amount of certainty to deliver with certainty to our communities. And this enabling framework that's being established allows for things like leapfrogging, what we would have called in the old days out of sequence development. So sequencing is no longer really a fundamental.
Adele Medenya has a question.
Sorry.
Yeah, just on that point. So the direction to have 30 years of land zoned ready to go, which effectively means becomes a bit of a free fall, because if we zone 30 years of land, it's basically go anywhere you like any time. So how do we create a logical flow of development when you have the scenario of 30 years? That I think we'll struggle with that, frankly.
I think we will struggle with it too. So obviously in the package, it's really clear that there is an expectation of growth pays for growth. However, you ask any councillor around this table, I bet over the last 20, 30 years, if growth has paid for growth in their districts or cities, how that has been achieved. But I think what will be really fascinating is what comes out in pillar 2. But one of the issues that we're looking at is when you might be looking at new ways of delivering infrastructure through private partnerships or through simply private delivery, that might look at the capital investment, but how do you ensure the ongoing maintenance and ongoing infrastructure capacity and capability to operate over time? Because it's really clear in this that when and where is seen as not a matter that councils will have any particular role in this process. So, yeah.
Mayor Tunui or Mayor Tapsell, whichever one is the hand belongs to.
Thank you. I do have 2 questions. The first question, obviously in this region, we have a lot of Māori owned land. So I just wanted to check in terms of the freeing up land. While we've been really fortunate, many of our Māori owned land holders or entities have wished to convert to housing. Just checking, there's no additional pressure for them to if they don't wish to. Because if you look at a map and you see all the green space, but then you take away the Māori owned land where they may not wish to sell or to develop on with housing, it gets a bit complicated. So, sorry, can you please just clarify that for me? And then I'll ask my next question.
I'd say at the moment there's no pressure to do that, and that's probably one of the matters that we obviously still don't know in terms of regional spatial planning, what the mandatory matters are for constraints. But we imagine that this is going to be a conversation for each of our councils about whether Māori owned land and how cultural values will be protected as a constraint in this new system.
Thank you very much. And then just my final question. I know definitely from feedback from a number of different developers here in Rotorua and then experience even with ourselves as council, sometimes the biggest barrier is around the stormwater requirements, but also the rules and restrictions that regional council will put on, which is either, like we have had issues in Ngongataha in particular, and concern around a large development out there and whether that will increase the flood risk because the Ngongataha River wasn't cleared or there was still some work needing to be done. But then also in newer areas around our district and the requirement then for them to put like unnecessarily large stormwater tanks on their properties. These are the sorts of things that accumulate horrendous costs actually for the developers. And so it's a little bit difficult that even within the councils, when we're trying to follow the national direction, there still isn't quite that marrying up from an operational perspective with our local councils across the region and also regional. And I know fortunately we've done our Rotorua future development strategy with regional council, which I hope will address it. But I just wonder how, in terms of stormwater being a major barrier, how we can also improve in this forum, in this region, any barriers that the regional council may be placing on local development.
Kia ora, Mayor Tapsell. So I think the part of it that I'll launch from is your comment on our relationship in Rotorua through the Rotorua FDS. So Namuta and I were in Rotorua on Monday talking about exactly this issue. And one of the, I guess, one of the points that your team and our team has come to is that we need to actually elevate it a little bit beyond the stormwater issue to the outcomes issue and agree on the outcomes. And then we come back and look at a broader base for how we actually respond to that. So we're doing some work with your team at the moment around how we might look at this. And in some ways, I think it reflects some of the work we've done recently in Oporiki district around the river scheme sustainability work and the multi-criteria analysis that was done there of trying to get both teams from the district and the region on the same page and being really open-minded about solutions before we come to an agreed selection on option. And so I think that way of working is going to become even more critical. Rather than we know best or you know best, it's how we can get to the best solution together.
I mean, the problem we're seeking to solve here is to shrink the housing deficit. So just, I mean, making land available helps. But if that land is purchased by, I don't know what the present law is on that, but we had a foreign buyer ban at one point. But if we're going to make more land available and just allow it to be purchased by, you know, overseas interests or whatever, then how does that help our housing deficit? I mean, it's a bit more profound than just the rules here, but I guess that's where it's all really what it's all about.
Yeah, and I think one of the things in this package is also the concept of offset. So if we determine that there's a local constraint, whether it might be that sort of constraint or a constraint we want to put on regarding character or anything else in particular, we will need to offset that demand somewhere else through our planning. So not knowing the example that you might be thinking of, but that might be one example of how we need to up in other places where we take from others. This was just a timeline, as I've said at the beginning, that this is moving really quickly. So I guess one of the key thing that I'd like to leave you with is those first two questions in particular, and they're going for housing growth. What we've heard back from people who are actively working with MFE is that we need to respond to those really clearly in this round, because this is our chance to influence the thinking in the next round.
Perhaps just to add as well, with these national direction pieces, the 16 pieces of national direction, those are going to be gazetted or coming into force at the end of this year. So once they are gazetted, we will then need to implement them. Clearly, a key driver for our enablement here. So all of those changes to those policy documents and NSs, we will then need to give effect to. And that's really key because those changes will be gazetted at the end of this year. And then I'm going to talk about RM reform replacement, which is going to come in middle of next year and be enacted at the end of next year. So timing is going to be quite interesting. So we'll have this likely for a year to give effect to. And some of the changes you'll see in this national direction are going to change again in phase 3. So I'll get on to phase 3, but essentially what this means is once it's gazetted, all of your resource consent processing, all of that needs to take into account this new direction, including your resource consent applications, your designations, anything that comes through to consider. So in relation to, now we'll move on to phase 3. We've covered off phase 1, phase 2. We're moving to phase 3. This is the big one. This is the replacement of the RMA, the document that we've all been working under. with two key new acts. And you'll recall before I mentioned that this government is particularly focused on making sure, that we could just go back one, making sure that we want a process that's more streamlined. They want to reduce the number of instruments. They want to reduce the number of policy layers in the system. Certainly there's a driver to be more cost effective and accessible. All of that means that this government is proposing to replace the Resource Management Act with two separate acts, the Planning Act and the Natural Environment Act. So for the Planning Act, that key focuses on enabling urban development, land use, growth, planning, and regulation. And in terms of the Natural Environment Act, so that's all about focusing on the use, protection, and enhancement of the natural environment. Under each of the acts, they're going to have their own policy direction, and they're all going to come together in one regional plan. And every region across New Zealand will have a regional plan, which is an electronic plan. And the idea is that central government will be able to zoom out and have a whole one plan for all of New Zealand. So in terms of the regional plan, where the Planning Act components and the Environmental Act components meet or interface, they come together in the regional spatial plan. So of the one plan, the key component will be the regional spatial plan that has a higher hierarchy, and that's where these pieces meet. So your regional spatial plan will set your strategic direction and growth and development and infrastructure. It will have statutory weight, which is quite different from our plans, our spatial plans at the moment, where they will be jointly prepared. And as I've mentioned, this is where the integration happens in terms of those decisions. Underneath the spatial plan, in the one plan, there will be different chapters, and each council is responsible for developing their own chapter under the Planning Act. Each local council, each territorial authority, and the regional council is responsible for developing the Natural Environmental Plan chapter. That is all underpinned by your compliance and enforcement. And if there are issues, minor issues, they can be dealt with at the planning tribunal. So as I've mentioned, those chapters are delivered by the local councils and regional council does the
I
environmental
have a
plan.
question from C. Perdia.
Thank you, Chairman Luca. We've been trying to figure this one out, and I'm just wondering if you're any close to what it might look like. How does that bit interplay with the current district plans?
So this is the interesting bit, and if we can hold that for the transition discussion, because that's really critical. How do we shift from our current system to the new system, and what does that look like? How, who, when, what? So I'm coming to that in the presentation. Just in terms of some key highlights of the RM system that I haven't mentioned before. So there will be a prescribed framework for environmental limits. Environmental limits for health will be set at the national level, and other environmental limits will be set at the regional level. There will be standardised planning provisions and performance standards, and of course, including nationally standardised zones. So currently, I think there's 30 zones across the country, and they are wanting to distill that down to a much smaller number. And they've been referring to the Japanese example, where I think they have 9 or 13 zones. So that there's quite a big exercise there. If you think about all of your district plans and all of the zones you've got in your district plans, there will be a big exercise there for when central government looks at standardising those zones. There will be much fewer activity categories. You know, at the moment we've got permitted, controlled, restricted, discretionary, non-complying, prohibited. So under this proposal, there would be you'd remove things like there wouldn't be controlled activity status, which is quite interesting because in the national direction, they're proposing to introduce new controlled activity status, but that's going to be removed in the new system.
Andrew, you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. At the risk of being told to wait for the next slide, I'll just ask anyway. Is the idea that the definitions are standardized nationally, but then how they're applied is determined by the TAs? So urban means urban, and it'll be prescribed what urban means, so you can't define the rules of urban within it. But where you apply the urban zoning, is that where the TAs will have a role to say, that's urban, that's rural lifestyle?
So that's my understanding. They'll be set nationally and then it'll be at the local level where you'll determine where that is. Just moving on, so there's going to be a higher threshold for adverse effects to be managed through consents and permits, and then clearly that shift away from monitoring and enforcement. Shift away from consenting to more focused on monitoring and enforcement. And I've mentioned the other one. So just in terms of that transition point that you raised earlier, this is where I have flagged. It's going to be really interesting. Certainly the EAG report, the advisory group that fed in its advice to central government before they made their decisions, they suggested that you deem plans or you do a switch on, switch off. So if you've got a spatial plan that meets the criteria, then it could be deemed in this new system as a spatial plan. However, I am not sure where central government will land on this. They might look at something else. So we are not clear. We don't have that direction yet in terms of how that change is going to occur or what that looks like. That's still to be determined. Certainly we've had those clear signals about regional spatial planning need to be prepared together, and very much everything, there will be a lot of standardization which occurs, and clearly a reduced policy focus. So through the chair.
So Namita, would you like to explain to us the role of the advisory group panel, how it was made up, what it reported to, and what uptake it got in terms of Cabinet's approval?
So the advisory group was made up of a number of specialists across a number of different sectors, including the primary sector. There was a mix of legal and environmental experts in that grouping, and they provided advice to Minister Bishop in relation to what they would consider would need to change as part of the system. They highlighted the issues, they highlighted the solutions, and very much that is the go-to in terms of how this reform is likely to play out. Certainly we understand as well, it wasn't a unanimous decision. There was a minority report from one of the EAG members who put forward their own positions, which weren't fully adopted by the government. Did that cover off? Did you want to add anything further down?
Yeah. Probably only that, in a way, because we had Christine Jones from Tauranga City Council sat on the expert advisory group, and we've got two members, one from the regional council, one from the City Council, again working on the transition arrangements. So as close as we can be to that, because they are under non-disclosure agreements, they are giving us a sense of where this is heading. So we're trying to feed that out as much as we can to your team.
I think, Namita, the message is that the advice given by the advisory panel is going to be pretty hard to roll unless you do some real good advocacy. So the die's getting cast already.
Absolutely. That's the document that the MFE staff keep going back to in terms of their decisions that the Cabinet have made. That's the go-to document. So have a look at that. If you notice, you might recognise the picture on the front of that. That picture looks from Matapihi across to here. And if you look really hard, you can see the Regional Council building. So that document is really key if you're thinking about how we move forward.
I think just finally to Mr. Purdy's point is that one of the things we're doing now is mapping all the components of our RPS and our plans and attempting to map all the components, the RPS and plans into the new system, which chapter they would sit under. So whether your council has started to do that exercise as well of just looking at where this might sit in the future. So it's in the spatial plan, it's in the natural environment plan, it'll be in a planning chapter, or it won't have a home. It's kind of the four broad categories that we're working under. And one of the reasons why we're doing that now is to identify, is there anything that doesn't have a home that we might think is a critical matter that is an orphan in the new system.
So through the chair, just in terms of, so that's the high level overview of the reform system, the 3 phases. There is a lot going on. It is quite a busy space because we've only talked about the resource management reform. There are other reform pieces going on, as Andrew referred to before. So in terms of what we are doing about this, so we have been connecting with all of the local councils on reform and how and where we might look to work together. Certainly, we've identified a number of areas where we think it makes sense to work together. And so you see there's some key points of where we have collectively agreed across the region, linking with all the local councils in different ways of working together. Adele, did you want to touch on that first point in terms of working together where it makes sense and where there's value, and some of the examples that have come up in the discussions today?
Yeah, so I think I'm losing my voice, but I think that in some ways the feedback we've had from government staff is that we're in a really good position in the Bay because we have 3 spatial plans that are adopted across our region, with the Rotorua FDS, the Eastern Bay Spatial Plan, and with Smart Growth. So we already have a sense of where it makes sense to work together and where there is value at that sub-regional level. The next stage of working together across the region is to go, are there matters that make sense to work together across the entire region? And these could be process issues as well as matters of substance, where it doesn't make sense for us to be working multiple times on the same matter, but rather sharing information as we go. And that kind of relates point 1 and point 2 up there together. And then identifying matters that are of a spatial nature, where it might be network corridors, transport, transmission, whatever those might be, that again go across our region, and we need to think collectively of that, where there is growth near or on boundaries which may influence future growth across those sub-regional boundaries as well. So those are the sort of things that we're now discussing about what they might be, and are those the pieces that we work together where there is additional value, and leave the local to the local.
So that really does.
Chair. Uploading, it's a very technical question, but I'll get asked it. So I need an answer. The uploading of spatial plans by regions around New Zealand into this national system, is that after the implementation on your timeline, the bottom line national, changing or the national directions? So is that after the implementation of the new Act
system?
So we're talking 2027 onwards.
Yeah, because you'd have to develop your regional spatial strategy. They all come together in that national picture. So that really does bring us to the end of our presentation. Just wanted to give you confidence that we are having connections and we are connecting with your teams across the region in terms of how we look to move forward together, what information we can share, where we can focus on, in terms of what areas make sense for us to focus on together. That's
That is, Medenya has a question.
One thing that concerns me is just the sheer volume of legislation and instruments that are coming our way, and the packages. And so far, we've decided, submitting on a fairly high level, and there's a feeling there's a lot of it, and the government are probably not going to change a lot anyway. But I do want to make sure that we as a region are on top of the issues that really matter to us. So perhaps it's not just a question for you, Namuta, but also for other mayors in the room, is that does everyone feel that they're getting the influence or input that is required? Because there's so much that I have a concern it's just going to fall through the gaps, and we won't be able to have our local concerns addressed.
absolutely, there is a lot going on in this space, and it's moving incredibly fast. So I'm sure there's lots of opportunities to discuss how to influence and where to influence. certainly when you're seeing different pieces of legislation with, 131,000 submissions and the use of AI to summarize those submissions, the scale is quite a bit. And admittedly, that isn't in the resource management reform space, that's in other spaces. Certainly, I think there is an opportunity, a key opportunity to put our best foot forward in terms of what is important for our communities. This is our.
Maybe when AI develops to the point of being able to generate perfect legislation, we can be assured of not spending the next 20 years trying to fix all of this mass of new legislation that we're going to get. There's going to be bugs everywhere, I suppose. But further questions? Thank you, Adele and Namuta. The next presentation, the one we've all been waiting for, is from Mayor Drysdale, who's going to talk about local government reorganisation in the Bay of Plenty. Thank you, Mahe.
Good afternoon, everyone, and yeah, it's a pleasure. So it's probably less of a presentation and more of a discussion. I think we've obviously had a couple of discussions along these lines over the last few weeks. I feel the momentum is building. We've had obviously Shane Jones's comments. The Prime Minister has chipped in on the future of regional government, which is interesting. Obviously, we just heard about the RMA reforms. We've got local waters done well. We've got the consenting authorities sort of reform that is still sort of bubbling away in the background, plus regional deals. And I think, as I don't know if you saw Chairman Leader's starring role on Q&A on the weekend, but have to agree with a number of those comments that this was a system set up in 1989, was it, Doug? Yep. And we're now in 2025 with no changes. So I don't think there's any argument from anyone that something needs to change. And I guess we've had these discussions already around the table, and I guess the challenge for me now to the rest of the mayors is we know something needs to change. We've talked about that things need to change. What are we actually going to do to make that change? And I'm aware that there's an election this year, and it's not ideal timing to be making decisions now. And I don't think we have to make decisions now, but we need to have a way forward of what is the process that we're going to go through that we're going to get our communities over the line and actually find a meaningful way to make this change happen. So that's really what I'd like to focus on today. What are the next steps? What are we going to do to be proactive and to move this conversation forward? Because I think what we're very good at local government is talking about things and never doing anything. And so that's really the challenge today, and what I'd love to hear people's views and discussion on of what do we do next and how do we make this happen.
Floor's open. What do we do next, and how do we make whatever it is that we're going to do happen? More.
Yes, we have got an election coming, so we're concentrating on that. Mahe, I know you don't have to, but listening to those two gentlemen that have come out and said those things, we've just saw a presentation where 1,700 doctors short in this country. We've got a net increase of police of less than 20 after 2 years. So they should be focusing on what they should be doing. So yes, we've got discussions to have, but the first thing you must learn in local government is going to talk to communities first before we make plans. I'm just saying that. I respect you bringing it forward today. You are the newest mayor in the room. Get through your 4-year term, and these things are going to happen, but first thing we must do as mayors is talk to our communities first, and it wouldn't go down well if they find that we're having discussions like this in the regions, especially when you're struggling with the challenges that we face. We've got a school that got half pulled down over a year ago, and then they found out it was beyond repair. They nearly closed it. You know, these are the sorts of things. So I'm not prepared to do their dirty work. If they want to make us force amalgamations, bring it on. You know, these things will happen over time, but yeah, take on board what your community wants. My community would not be happy if we were doing this in an open forum. They would not be happy.
I think though that is the next steps. If that is the you know, taking the community with you, and that's why I said in my introduction that we need to say what do we need to do to get something happening, because I hear what you're saying is you know that the community wouldn't be happy. We've got to get out there and explain what we need to do. There's no, you know, like I don't have a definitive this is where we need to get to. It's we need to start moving to change what we have now. And you know, your point there is around the school is as a Potiki going and representing yourself to government. You know, we've had Minister Watts saying, you know, the airtime will be given to the, you know, to the relative size of what you're asking. And, you know, that's I think a prime example where we've got to be, you know, better organised. The way we deliver things is not efficient. We've got 7 councils around this table. We're doubling, or we're 7 timesing a lot of the overheads, etc. So, you know, our communities are crying out for things to be delivered more efficiently and effectively. And so we've got to find a way to do that. And that doesn't change necessarily even the representation. That's on the table. How does the representation work? But yeah, I think we can say let's let them do it to us. Well, you know, then we're going to be on the back foot, and it's going to be like local water's done well, where we don't have a lot of control around what the process is or how it happens. That's my view from, you know, and I am new, and that's why I think I've come in and looked at it and said this is broken, we need to fix it. So let's do it.
Yep. I just got to reply to that. I mean, the comment about the school, that's a bit ridiculous. Of course, we've been advocating for the school, and that's not actually our role as a local government. But yeah, it's their role, not ours. But is what we actually end up doing, just like we end up advocating for police. We haven't, you know, our mothers have to travel to Tauranga to have babies in emergencies. We've lost two through, you know, these big things. So yep, we got a role, and yeah, we looking at, you know, amalgamation is different to working together. Of course, we should be working together. So yep, I'll take on board what you're saying, but let's take the communities with us before we go somewhere like this.
So can I just have a succinct problem statement? What problem are we seeking to solve here? It's a question of you want to enhance efficiency by increasing scale.
It's around that local government is not fit for purpose in 2025. It's not effective or efficient. We've got huge infrastructure deficit that we need to solve, and rates are going up, you know, around the country. So how do we deliver better for our communities? That is.
So do you understand the causes of the infrastructure deficit? Because you can't solve a problem if you don't know what caused it.
Well, I can tell you in Tauranga, it is underinvestment over a number of years. You know, it's under collection of development contributions. It's, you know, there's a whole lot of regulatory settings as well as you know, I guess local governors that wanted to keep rates lower than they should have been and underinvested in infrastructure. There's a big reason for us in Tauranga for being where we are today.
Yeah, I mean, I could argue about this all day, but I won't, because we're not the only people who build infrastructure. In fact, most of our critical, large-scale infrastructure was built by central governments back in the day, and we were able to keep up with infrastructure developments until the 80s, whereupon some brilliant economists came up with their new paradigm for how things should be done. And what we've had since then is an opening gap in an infrastructure deficit, of which they're quite happy to lay on our doorstep. We're not the only actors in this game. So you're arguing essentially that if we condense everything and increase scale, then that would be better, if I'm hearing correctly.
It would, in the fact that we would have a much more powerful voice with central government. And, you know, this is the issue. You've got 78 local authorities at the moment, all you know, talking to government. If we were one region that is quite large, and this is, you know, look at Wayne Brown. He hasn't been to Wellington. All the ministers go and sit in his office. Why do they do that? Because Auckland is so important to the country and to the ministers that they will travel to Auckland and go and talk to him. So, you know, yes, there is you know, I guess power in numbers and power in that scale. I'm a big advocate of that. That we'll be able to work closer with government to solve some of these problems.
Do you think that we have more leverage if we're bigger units? Because the scale argument itself, I've looked into a little bit recently, and it doesn't seem to be very well founded. There is no real evidence to suggest that. Anyway, yes, I can see that either Mayor Tunui or Mayor Tapsell want to ask a question.
Yeah, thank you. Not necessarily a question, but just happy to give just a few points on it. So I know the discussion topics, local government reorganisation, Bay of Plenty, but I think it would be, obviously we do have the RMA reforms on the horizon, which will have a significant impact on our regional council, and then also the comments that we've heard from government, including the Prime Minister, about there potentially could be a changing role of regional council in the future. But I think probably the best focus area for us to look at, and bearing in mind, we do need to have a wide discussion with our own councils and then our communities before committing or giving a direction. But I think as well as Victor mentioning what's the problem, also what would practically be the specific areas in our councils that would see efficiencies, only because we often hear from others that, you know, mean big is more efficient, but quite honestly, we've got a bit of post-trauma, you could say, in the Bay of Plenty from the Tertiary Institute reforms, and also from the health reforms and the catastrophic results of that, as unfortunately Mayor David has mentioned. So I think, you know, if there were areas such as, I don't know, the waters that's coming forward, potentially transport. I know that we've got a very good CCTV camera operations room here, whether we could also be looking at and monitoring the smaller districts to assist with community safety. So, you know, it's those sorts of practical things, but I also think with the RMA reforms and potential changes at the regional council level across the country, it may also be an opportunity like the Three Waters for us to say, well, and what councils would, if we chose to go down that way, make the most natural alliance, as an example, because I think it will be pretty hard sell to our regions, our communities at the moment to start all working together on everything. You can tell how many years it's taken our communities just to get their heads around starting to think about the Three Waters discussion. So, well, I do agree with Mayor Mahe that we need to be better organised. I think there may be some things with benefits, but there are other things that naturally, as we have the argument of, you know, we should be making local decisions with Three Waters, that, yeah, it'll be the same. But also, sorry, finally, there was so much work done in the local future for local government potential reforms in the document that was pulled together by GNZ as well. So just really encourage that, you know, that's still sitting there on a shelf somewhere collecting dust, and that could be a good starting point on the many years of discussions that has sort of led us to here as well. So don't know if that was any help, but definitely sort of my thoughts at the moment.
Hey, Daniel.
I think I've always advocated that form follows function, and at the moment the function's quite up in the air. We have ministers and the Prime Minister saying regional councils, maybe, maybe not. We've got RM, a little bit uncertain where that's going to land. You've got waters, some councillors are keeping it, some councillors are not. It's actually a little bit unclear what our role for in local government is going to be going forward. You've also got, wellbeing coming out as well. So, are we infrastructure bodies? Are we looking after the community as a whole? Are we, how much of that infrastructure are we doing? So until we get a little bit of clarity on that, it's quite hard to work out the, what form we should be. Having said that, I've always said that working closer together is going to benefit our communities, and I think Tauranga and Western Bay already do that to some extent, and there's definitely room for further improvement. I think the promises of organisations like BOPLAS have not really been fulfilled as much as they could be. So there's room for improvement, but until we get a better understanding of what the future for local government is, I think the function question is going to be problematic.
Thanks, Medenya. Actually, you made a good point at one of our previous meetings where you said in water delivery, all these councils are using different software setups. So that doesn't make any sense. So we've got to stop the stuff that doesn't make any sense. But that question that you just raised, I put to the minister a few weeks ago, said, where to use it? What will local government look like in 5 years after you've done the RMA, the local water done well? And the answer was, he doesn't know. So there's your answer. More questions, more discussion?
I think that's a really good point, but I guess that's what I'm, no, I don't know what you think. I haven't come here and said, look, we're going to just amalgamate a unitary across the region. It's saying, let's have these discussions, because like, I agree, James, we don't know exactly the function, but if you actually look at, like, this legislation is rolling out all the time. We just had an update on the RMA. I think you can see where this is going, so you can have a pretty good idea as to, but that's the discussions we've got to have, I think, now, and say, okay, well, if this is where it is, what is the best system? What is our role? What can we do together? Those are the sort of things we've got to come together. I'm not here with a set outcome of this is where we're going. It's just, how do we progress from here to something different? And we can wait for 5 years and the government will decide what local government and does, and they'll do it for us, or we can be proactive and say, actually, let's look at it. And I agree with Tanya. It may not be that that this region is actually naturally aligned. It might be that that people go in different directions, and that's what we've, it's not just because of what the map says. Let's look at the map overall and kind of figure out what makes sense even in that respect. Like, I guess with us in Western Bay, we're effectively one economy. We're not one economy with Whakatane. That's just the reality of it. So everything that we do, and we've got Smart Growth, which is our urban growth partnership. We're looking at that from a sub-regional perspective. But those are the sort of alliances, I guess, that we've got to really do. And all our water assets are in Western Bay's district. All our freshwater assets, we treat some of their sewage, just stuff like that. That local water's done well is just a no-brainer that we kind of work together. So those are the sort of, that's probably where I'm saying, let's have that conversation and let's look at everything we do and where we might be going, and what is the solution for us as a Bay of Plenty and a wider region, to be more effective and efficient. That's sort of probably more where I'm pitching this, not that we're going to be a unitary council across the Bay, and how do we get there? That's the discussion I think we need to have.
Mahe, have you read a document called, with the title, Does Size Matter? The Impact of Local Government Structure on Cost Efficiency by the Infrastructure Commission?
Yeah, I have, yeah.
And what did you think?
Yeah, it's interesting. But I think that's like, there's a whole wider thing to this discussion is, you know, like what does make sense, because scale in some ways does make sense. And then in other ways it scale for scale's sake, I guess, doesn't. You know, and yeah, you've got to look at, and you know, it's really interesting, another stuff around the infrastructure commission, and if you look at the they use you know, private assets versus the public assets, and the efficiencies, you know, in infrastructure investment, for example, in telecom and in the power assets, and you know how inefficient we are in local government around that sort of investment and the return on those assets, which you know is quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't cover your point about the influence you can have by being bigger, because that obviously holds. But from the point of view of dividing things up into bits, this doesn't suggest that the evidence is there to suggest that scale produces more efficiency. In fact, it argues the opposite. But anyway, it's got some interesting data in it. Any further discussion on this one?
Oh, I think there's going to be some debate at the LGNZ conference, isn't it?
I don't know. If you say so. All right. Well, no further comments or questions. All right, fine. So we've come to the end of that, but thanks, Mahe, for putting it out there and, you know, getting us thinking some more. The next bit is verbal update. Local water's done well. Chief Executive Andrew Moraes from Mayoral Lakes. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. I think this will be a team act. I might just talk a little bit about what's happening in Rotorua, Eastern Bay, but by all means, others from those regions chip in after those districts chip in, and then perhaps the Tauranga Western Bay cohort, not yet the Unitary Council, but maybe moving that direction, might want to chip in. So for us in Rotorua, and I believe other councils are similar, proceeding down a path, and our resolutions have been approved by council, that we will be working towards a final decision in 2027 about setting up a joint water services CCO by 1 July 2028. There is a fallback option should those joint discussions not yield a result that the councils are convinced serve the local community and are in the long-term interests of, well, for Rotorua, our district, and our residents, visitors and ratepayers. So we're proceeding to put together a water services delivery plan on that basis. What we're also doing is gearing up for quite an active conversation that includes elected members, but also takes the community on the journey over the period that starts with the elections, very real reality coming up soon, and the preparation of the next long-term plan. So there's about a 12, 14-month period during which the four councils are proposed to work together very closely, bring elected members on the journey, share that information with the public, with a final decision then that goes together with the 27-37 long-term plan, and with the go-live date of 1 July 2028. That's the plan. The actual material that we submit to the DIA might vary somewhat from that, because we don't yet have combined financials, and so I'm in discussions with the DIA, and we all will be soon, to articulate how we basically submit what is our fallback option to DIA for approval. The final document will go back to council, obviously, and then be approved before submitting to the minister by the 2nd of September. Mayor Tapsell, anything to add to that? Tried to be brief and not controversial.
Good job. We'll leave the controversy to the mayors. Thank you. I did just want to mention, it was fantastic. Thank you very much to the mayors who joined us in Dorset when Minister Simon Watts came to visit. I think it was a fantastic opportunity for him to hear from across our region, but also a great opportunity for us to just let him know some of the challenges in the September deadline with an October election coming up, and that essentially we needed it all done by the end of this week. Not September. So I think he took that on board, but as we would have heard from the response back from him, they are really wanting us to look more regionally. I want to say that definitely my council here in Dorset, the key challenge of those who didn't want to go wider, they wanted to stay in-house, was only because of promises that they had made to our community, or strong stances that they took about keeping decision-making local. And so for that to be their stance at the start of the term, but then just at the end of the term, they are seen to be supporting regional, even if they could see the logic. And from discussions that I've had, I think that's also been a challenge with many of your councils as well, is even though it's not three waters anymore, just the stance that many of us took to keep it local. So I think we'll see what comes from September. There's not much more that we can do now. I'm not sure how it impacted your guys' long-term plans and rates, but it was certainly the government reform such as this work that was actually increasing the pressure and our rates, because our staff have to continue this mahi certainly for the next year. Hopefully we all at the table as well. But yeah, it'll just be an ongoing challenge, but it's probably just my perspective from elected members' view.
Thank you, Mayor Tapsell. Well said. Thank you. Mayor Denyer.
I'd like to just ask members for Rotorua and also Eastern Bay how that decision has been articulated, around making a decision in 2027 for a multi-CCO in 2028, because the impression I get, and I'm pretty sure I'm not local and in there in the local communities, but the impression I get is there's a feeling that they've won and it's going to stay in house, and that's where it kind of ends. And I don't know how well that it's been communicated that actually it's going to be maybe just a year later than Mahi and I, and actually there's not much difference in outcome in terms of multi-council CCO versus in-house.
Happy to answer that, Chair. Look, we've been very clear that we've preserved a final decision point for the council of the day. Very clear that final decision is going to rest with the council that will adopt the next long-term plan. And what we've done is we've outlined to elected members have approved, so that I then have to do that with the next lot of elected members, is go through that journey, investigate that joint water services CCO, keep the public informed, but absolutely clear that the decision that council has made was not to set up a CCO at this stage. They've indicated an intention to explore it and the parameters around which they'll explore it, the time frame around which they'll explore it, and with whom they will work to explore it, but does preserve the final decision for the council of the day in 2027 when the long-term plan is adopted. So that in that sense, it is quite different to committing to a joint water services CCO at this point.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And as I alluded to, it's looking increasingly likely that in the Western Bay, it's Tauranga City, it's Western Bay, and it's TCDC with a start date of July 27 rather than 26. But we had a great catch up a couple of days ago, and between the three councils, and there's some good kōrero for that afternoon. Thank you.
It's Thames Coromandel, TCDC. But and agree with James. I think we've got our decision on the 14th of July as to which way we go, whether it's multi-council CCO. As I said, that's our preferred model. That's the direction we've been working in. But never guess which way the council is going to go. So that's sort of our timeline. The 5th of August, we'll be signing off our draft water services delivery plan. So that's from our perspective. Thames Coromandel have already made a decision to go for multi-council CCO with Western Bay and us as preferred partners. But I just reiterate, that working together and to Victor's point, we need to keep these conversations going as to even within that entity, what shared services can we do to make that more efficient. And on the other, if anyone's interested to join, we're also always open to that. If we can show that is mutually beneficial to both parties. So yeah, that's where we're at the moment. Anything to add, Marty?
No, I think that's it.
Steve, got anything to add? No. Okay. All right. Well, then I think we've closed that one off. All right. Well, we've come to the end of our agenda for today. So I'll close up with a karakia. Yes.
Aren't there public excluded minutes?
No, we've already done them.
Oh, have you?
Pay attention, Steve.
What was I doing?
Okay. Just change my glasses. Kua mutu o mātou mahi mō tēnei wā, mana ake kia, mai mātou katoa, o mātou hoa, o mātou whānau, ai o ki te aorangi. Thank you, everybody.